is that women were not changing behavior when the opponent was a man with respect to a woman. They were behaving the same, but men were changing behavior. And what we found in the data is that men were taking longer to resign against a woman. The psychological cost of losing against a woman was larger for men in comparison with losing against another man.
Welcome, everyone. Today on the Chess Equity Project interview series, we have Dr. Maria Cubel. She is an economist whose research focuses on gender differences in behavior, particularly in competitive environments. She did her undergrad studies at the University of Barcelona and graduate work and PhD at University of York in the UK. She taught at the University of Barcelona for 14 years before moving on to the University of London City of St. George's, where she was the director of economics research and where she now teaches. She is associate editor of the Journal of Behavioral and Experimental Economics, and she is widely known within the community of people doing chess research for her empirical studies on gender and competition, and she's the PhD advisor for our previous guest, Julia Engel. She also organized the first Women in Behavioral and Experimental Economics workshop in London, which was a symposium of over 30 female economists from around the world presenting and discussing economic issues related to gender. So Dr. Cubel doesn't just research gender issues, she is leading the way in creating opportunities for women in her own field. And before I spend our entire hour reciting her CV, which I could, because it's quite impressive, I'll just say welcome, Dr. Cubel. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me, and super thank you for mentioning this workshop for only women. What it was a bit difficult to organize because it was very difficult to find money to do it. So, it's not, people sometimes are not so happy when you say, oh, I want to organize a workshop only for women. They say, why do you want to limit, to reduce attendance to only one of the genders? So it's always a bit of difficult but we managed. Yeah. So next year probably will be in Barcelona. We are trying to keep going with that. So that's good news.
I think it's fantastic. Well, and I hope, and I'm fingers crossed for you, I hope now that you have done one and that it's been successful, keeping it going will hopefully be a little bit easier.
Yes, I hope so. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and so speaking of Barcelona, you did undergrad there, you taught there. Is that your hometown?
Yeah, I'm from Barcelona originally. Yes.
That's wonderful. I've only spent a few days there, but it's a beautiful city. So how did you make your way to the University of York? What drew you there?
Well, I was at Barcelona, and then I had a mentor in Barcelona, and he had done some postgraduate studies in York, and he recommended me to do a master there. So I went to York. I did a master in advanced economics, and then I decided to stay for the PhD because, I went to York because there was a professor that was specialized in income distribution and inequality measurement. He's a mathematician, Peter Lambert. And then I went there to do my master degree and later to do the PhD under his supervision. So that was a bit the idea. So I went to York because of him, because he was working on income inequality and income distribution from the perspective of measurement and a bit like social choice type of literature. So yeah, that's the reason to go to York.
Oh, that's great. And it seems like a lot of your research is about inequalities, more on, the gender side. Do you feel driven, like personally, for that sort of research? It seems like you've been doing it for a while.
Yeah, inequality was something that was interesting to me. That's why I decided to do the PhD on inequality measurement. It was a combination between inequality and decentralization, looking at the income tax. So my PhD was more into the public economics tradition, but theoretical, because it was not, at that point, I was not doing empirical work. I was doing mainly theory and using simulations. So that was my PhD. And then later I became interested in experiments. I had always been interested in experimental economics. I was using classroom experiments in my teaching. And then eventually I managed. It's difficult to do experiments when you don't have a lab in your institution. So I remember that, at the beginning it was a bit difficult. I was at the University of Barcelona at that time, and jointly with Santiago Sánchez-Pagès, that is my main co-author and my partner, my husband, we ran the first ever experiment at the University of Barcelona using just pen and paper. It was super fun. I remember I have a very good memories of this time. It was difficult because we didn't have very much money, and there was not a lab, but we managed. And from that period is our experiments analyzing or studying gender differences in strategic sophistication. I was interested, so basically, I think I was interested in inequalities from the beginning and poverty as well. But then, based on anecdotal observations, what was going on at the university, observing how I was feeling in some situations, I was very much interested in gender differences, because I was as well observing that my students, female students and male students, were behaving differently, especially because I was teaching quite a bit of mathematical courses. And I realized that female students were requiring like more, I don't know, they were like, a bit more like not so keen into maths. And then it will require from me to give them more confidence, go like talk to them, trying to persuade them. At the end, they were super good. I mean, it's not that they were not good at maths. It's that they had like a bit of I don't know, reluctancy, to get into that. They were not jumping, let's say. They didn't, many of them didn't think were good enough. So then I realized about that and about other things, that were happening at the time. So I was very much interested in analyzing gender differences.
Okay.
And that's why, yeah. So, and experiments give you the tool to analyze gender differences in many, many situations. You have full control of the environment under which you are analyzing a particular question. And that's why I thought that experiments were ideal, was the right
Yeah.
tool to use.
Well, and so let me ask you about experiments. And this is something that I hadn't even thought of. I just, as someone who's a lawyer, not an academic, I had just sort of assumed that experiments were just part of research and academia. But what you're saying is that's not necessarily the case. I mean, there's sort of like theoretical stuff, and you just think about things and write about things, and not everyone does experiments. Is what it sounds like. Is that right?
No, I mean, some people don't like very much experiments. They don't trust them so much. External validity might be an issue in some conditions. So it's not the most popular tool to use. Is becoming more and more, because there are different types of experiments. You have lab experiments, but you have also field experiments. Field experiments are becoming super popular. You have lab in the field that is a combination of both. So I think it's becoming more and more an acceptable tool. The nice thing of experiments is that sometimes there is not the data out there. So you cannot answer a particular question if you don't run an experiment. Because the experiment, when you run an experiment, be in a field or a lab, it allows you to obtain your own data. And then sometimes it's the only way to address and analyze a particular,
In
try to answer a
chess,
particular. Chess is amazing.
have you had, is there, I mean, in general, is there easy access to data,
To chess data?
to chess data?
The paper that you wanted to talk today about, that
Right.
is a paper on gender.
The FIDE data.
we just downloaded from the internet, there was data that you had to pay for, but we only use, again, at that time, I was in Barcelona, and Peter, Santi, and myself, we were in the same place at the same university. We were meeting every day for lunch. So that paper was, the result of many, many interesting conversations. So yeah, we just downloaded from the web, it was free data because, as I said, we didn't have very much money at that time. So we couldn't pay for it was very large database, but it was free.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, and I do want to go back and talk about the the paper, but I mean, just while we're talking about data, like, are there better sources if now that you have access to money, would you have done it differently? Is there anything like that you would change?
No, I think that it was perfect. I mean, we had sufficient data to perform the analysis.
Okay.
Maybe if I could ask, I wouldn't mind running experiments, field experiments using actual tournaments. I don't think I will be allowed to do that, but, that would be super interesting. But I don't think I'm allowed. So in general, you can have very rich data, chess data, because as you know, do you play chess, I guess, no?
I do. Do you?
So
I
as
should have asked. Are you a
No,
chess player?
no, no. I don't play chess. I mean, the only chess I have played is with my father when I was little. So I don't play. I don't play chess. So he was just teaching me how to play chess, but not anymore. But you know that chess people, when you play chess, people record the data on chess is super rich. You have information on everything. You have the characteristics of the players, you have the federation, you have the gender, you have the nationality, you have all the moves of the games, you have the outcome. So the tournament, the time as well of each movement. And the time of each movement is the only thing we didn't have. And then I would have liked to have this information with this
Okay.
paper with this data that we use.
The clock times. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
The clock times, we didn't have it, maybe because it was only free, but we have data on all the moves, the moves, yes, and everything. So it was
Okay.
very rich. So because it's a very rich data set, and the most important thing is that you have ability for the players. That usually in many other contests, you don't have such a good measure of ability. And with just data, you have this measure. So then you can
Right.
compare players. And this in other settings is not, this type of measure of skill or ability is not so good. So this is the advantage, one of the advantages of chess as well.
Yeah, and we've been over this before. It seems like a pretty great, I mean, as from a perspective of a researcher, it's a nice field to research because there is easy access to data and because there are so many data points that everybody uses and is just used to. So your paper that we're talking about is called Gender Competition and Performance: Evidence from Chess Players. And I'll just hit the high points. We've been kind of talking about it already, but this paper evaluated a sample that started at over 58,000 games. These are FIDE matches from 2012 and 2013. The players were rated over 2,000, and all of these games had to be between a female and a male player because you were
No,
examining how the players performed in a mixed gender setting. Is that right?
yes, but not all the games that we had were mixed gender. We
So you had to sort them.
Exactly. So there was the whole sample included single gender games and mixed gender games. Then we had this reduced sample that we did all the analysis with both samples and everything went through. Then we had the sample of only mixed gender games that, of course, it was mixed gender tournaments. That is not mixed gender games. And this sample was smaller. I don't recall now, but but I was smaller than the other one for sure.
Right, and I think it turned out to be it was 28,000 or something. I don't have it in front of me.
Yes, I have it in front of me, 29,000, nearly a bit less. This is the sample that we call switchers. That was the sample with only mixed gender tournaments. So, but as I
Okay.
said, we did everything with both, and everything was fine.
Did
So
you
the bigger
use
sample gave us more power, more precise estimates. But when we used the switchers, everything was.
do you need the larger sample, the same gender games, the men against men games? Do you use those as a control to compare the mixed gender games?
No, what we were doing was analyzing within game variation. So we have panel data. So we have individual level data. So you had the same individual could be playing in different games against different opponents.
Okay.
So we were using the player as our measure, and then you had the game, you had the round, you had the tournament. Yeah.
Okay. And will you walk us through what you found, the differences um, when men competed against, or when women competed against men, they played a little bit worse. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So everybody played worse against a male opponent, but then it's symmetric, no? So I think that the point estimate was 0.03 points. So everybody was losing 0.03 points when playing against a man. But then because it's symmetric, if the man is playing against a woman, is winning these points, all right? So basically controlling for ELO difference, all the information we had on players, women were playing worse against men. Everybody was playing worse against men, but that implied a handicap for women of about 25 ELO points, if I remember correctly.
Okay. So when you say 0.03, you're talking about, 1 point is a win, half a point, 0.5
Yes.
points is a draw. So of that, so 0.03 is, I mean, it's smallish, but it's not insignificant. I mean, that
Yeah, we
does
did
add up.
we did the conversion for women represents like playing with a handicap of 25
Of
ELO
25
points.
elo.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the convergence that we were using.
And when men played against men, that did not exist, correct?
Not everybody was playing worse against men, but that means that a man playing against a woman was playing better than a man playing against another man.
Oh, okay. That's where the difference is the
Exactly.
when the men play against women, they get the boost. And
Exactly.
do you know, I mean, obviously this is reviewing the data, but do you know why?
Well,
What's causing
then,
this?
yes, then we had different. I remember that we studied different mechanisms in the paper. So what we were doing was that, it could be that men are different, use different strategy when they are playing, because there is this very famous paper by Gransmar that analyzes the openings. And then I think it's Grassman and someone else. I'm very bad with names. Gransmark and
No, I know it, the aggressiveness.
it's Gerters and Gransmark, yes, to 2010. So in this paper, what they find is that men have a tendency they classify the openings into aggressive and solid, or aggressive and not aggressive, let's say, to understand. And then they observe that men have a tendency to use more aggressive openings, and they do it even more when the opponent is a female. But they also observed that there is a negative correlation between using an aggressive opening and the probability of winning. So basically, using an aggressive opening doesn't increase your chances of winning. So this couldn't explain our results. And we didn't have as well this classification into aggressive and solid openings. We use in one of the robustness checks that we perform in the paper, we use the classification of the encyclopedias. We control for all the different openings that we could classify, and nothing changed. So it was not about that men and women have different styles of playing. It's not that men use more aggressive openings, because this couldn't explain our result. What we do then is to analyze the middle game. And then what we do is to analyze the quality of play of the move of the player. So we were comparing each move of the player against a computer or a chess engine. And in particular, in the middle game. So that means that we compare the quality of each move from the 15 to the 30 move. And we were comparing how good was the move of the human player in comparison with a chess engine that was much more powerful with a higher elo. I think it was 3,000. 3,000. It was below 3,200. It was a powerful computer at that time. Now there are even more powerful computers, but
Sure.
but basically this is what we were doing. We were comparing the quality of the move of each individual move for each player in
And
each
this is
game.
cent upon loss?
Exactly. Yes, you're correct. Well, if you had the interview with Julia, I'm sure she explained it wonderfully, because she is a player. So she understands very well this measure of advantage. So basically it's a measure of advantage that is correlated with the probability of winning. Yeah. So then we were calculating this measure of error. So we were calculating how good was the move of the human player in comparison with the chess engine. The chess engine was always better than the human player.
Right.
Because let's say it's more optimal. Okay. And then the difference in quality of play, that is this measure of advantage that you were mentioning, is a measure of error. So actually we were calculating the error that the player was making at each move in the middle game. And then we were calculating the average. And we were doing that for each player in each game.
Okay. And that's how that's the actual measure of the calculation.
Yeah. I don't know
But
if I should mention as well that when you measure this measure of advantage or quality of play of each move takes in consideration 15 moves. So it is like a tree where you go 15 moves in
the
advance.
depth.
So exactly, depth.
Okay.
15 moves of depth. And you take into account as well the condition on the board. So the pieces that are on the board and where they are located.
Right. And you also discarded any games that did not last 15 moves, because you had to get to at least the 15th move before you even started analysis.
Correct.
Okay.
So
Well,
we were using more like classical chess with longer games. Yeah.
sure. Well, and you describe it as behavioral changes that are leading to these different outcomes. So can we just clarify, this is a behavioral change, right? Or it's not a cognitive difference between men and women. Does this paper say that women are worse at chess because women just are inherently biologically not as good at chess? Is that what this says?
It's not what we say. And actually we were investigating that, and we mentioned in the paper that there is not evidence of genetic gender differences on play chess ability or anything like that. I remember that we mentioned we were revising all the literature on psychology, and women have advantage on face recognition that is good to recognize patterns in the board. Men have an advantage, so are relatively better in rotating figures. Yes,
Spatial.
a spatial rotation, and there are some experiments analyzing that. But, both are qualities that are good when playing chess. So there is no clear advantage of men or women genetically. So then what we observe in the data is that when women are playing against a man, controlling for everything that we can control, they commit a larger average error. So this measure of quality of performance,
Mm-hmm.
that is a measure of average error in the middle game, is larger for women when they play against a man. But men don't react. So basically, this average error for men doesn't change with the gender of the opponent. So they don't, their average error doesn't change whether they play with a man or with a woman. But for women, the error is larger when they play against
But it's not biological. It's not because they're worse inherently. It's psychological, maybe, or sociological.
That's what we argue in the paper.
Okay.
I mean, it's consistent with the idea of a stereotype threat theory. The idea, because that there is a huge negative stereotype for women in chess. They are a minority. Usually their average ELO is lower in our sample as well. We have, I think the percentage in the full sample is 13% of females. The average ELO is lower. And it's true that there is a negative stereotype. We collected some quotations from grandmasters that they were saying not very nice things about
Yes.
women players. So the idea is that, women play worse at chess. The stereotype threat theory is what is about is that when there is a negative stereotype, it can affect your cognitive performance in the sense that, your part of your brain, even if it's just unconsciously, is busy trying to not perform according to the stereotype. But then as a result of that, your performance is lower than what it could be if the stereotype was not there. So basically part of your cognitive capacity is part of your brain is busy trying to control these negative emotions, trying to not to comply with the stereotype. And it's like a self-fulfilled prophecy where, trying not to do something, you end up doing it. So the result that we find is consistent with this theory. But I don't know if you are familiar, but the stereotype threat theory has not replicated very well. So it's not very popular at the moment. So, there is a big question mark on that.
Okay.
So
It's interesting though. That's funny because the paper, I mean, and maybe it's one of the unpopular ones. It was a lab experiment where and I think it was actually when I was reading about the spatial rotational abilities, there was a gender difference. They told the women before they took the test, you're not going to be good at this.
Yes.
Basically, it was basically it was a rotational finding, but it was also a stereotype threat finding. They said, women, you're not going to be good at this. That part of them, and then those women were worse than the women who weren't told anything.
I know it's not about maths instead of rotation figures, because there is this paper exactly what you are saying, but with mathematical calculations. They tell them that there is a negative stereotype for women doing maths, and then they perform worse than they. So basically, the same task, you tell them that, there is the stereotype that women are worse, then it affects them even if, it shouldn't. So there is a difference between priming them with this stereotype or not. It's fascinating. But it's, as I said, it's not a good, how can I say? Let's say the stereotype threat theory has lived better days. And
Okay.
and that was a pity, because at the time we were publishing that paper, we were discussing our results. We can never say this is a stereotype threat because, I don't have any physiological measure. I will need a scanner of the brain and see whether some parts of the brain highlight when they do something. So I cannot say anything, but the only thing we can say is that the finding that we obtain is consistent with this theory, but referees were very much against. So we couldn't mention that. So, but it's because of this lack of replicability. So this is something that has not replicated well.
No, I understand. And I mean, but also you're speaking as a scientist, we need to be able to nail down perfectly. And I think, I think, from a non-scientist, and I think anyone out there who's just trying to put themselves in the shoes of a woman in a tournament who's the only woman in a playing hall or something like that, or one of the few, it makes sense if I'm imagining that to think everybody's looking at me, everyone's going to judge me. I'm representing all women right now. And if I screw up, then it hurts women worldwide. That's a burden, and it's going to suck up some of my bandwidth, right? And I may not calculate as well. Because I'm just a little bit distracted.
I agree completely, but at the same time, the women that we have in our sample are professional. I mean, they are very good.
2,000 FIDE or above. That's strong. Yeah, they're
well,
strong.
This is in average. Yeah, but our players are good. So if our women are a select group of women playing chess, so if anything, they should be for sure more competitive. They are more used to this competition, but still we find this result. So that's revealing. Actually, I was invited to a panel at the female world championship on chess. That was,
Okay.
I think, if I remember properly, I think it was 2023. It was celebrated in Sitges in Catalonia.
Oh,
So it
right.
was the female championship, the world championship. So many players were there, and I was invited to this panel because of this paper. So I had the opportunity to talk with grandmasters, two female, one that was very, very international important grandmaster, and another one that was Spanish as well. So several few grandmasters and females as well. These two were females. And in particular, one of them, they were saying, oh, no, I don't believe that, they were a bit upset with, one of them was a bit upset with the result because they are very competitive. They are very they are, how can I say, because by now there is a strong evidence showing that women are shy away from competition. They don't like competing so much. And when they do, usually they underperform men. That, it depends on the task. It depends on different things, but it depends on the gender of the opponent. So, there are different things playing a role there. But it was super interesting, this panel, because, I could see these very competitive ladies telling me, no, this never happens. And I was telling them, but look, this is the data, we didn't do anything. This is what the data is telling us. So for this very selective group of females, this is the result. That means something, I think.
And also, I mean, the sample in your study, and certainly grandmaster level players, I mean, if we're talking about the bell curve, we're really analyzing the players that are kind of out on the tail. They're not exactly all outliers, but we're not talking about the majority of players, really.
No, exactly. And as well, we did some reverseness. We did plenty of reverseness playing with the, taking out the players with lower elo, taking out single gender games, tournaments, taking out different things. And still, the result was there, Of course, we were losing precision because the sample was smaller and smaller. But so let's put it that way. We couldn't get rid of this result.
Okay. Yeah, that's a better way to put it. The results persisted regardless of what you tweaked.
So then that means it's a very robust finding. So the way I took it, because at the beginning, I'm the only female in the group. So I was a bit like, oh, that's not nice. Why? Why is this happening? No? So it's not good news, let's say. But then I was thinking, okay, let's take a more positive approach. It's much better to understand to find out this happens and to understand why and to do something about it than not to
Yes.
ignore it. So that was, because we were trying to get a parallelism between this context of, competent chess, higher stakes, very selective group of players. We were making the parallelism between this and, positions in companies, let's say, very male dominated, very competitive, where you need to work many hours. And, women are a minority. So we were trying to make the parallelism there. If this happens in this very selective group of people who are trained to compete, prepared to compete, and they must like to compete because they self-select themselves into that.
Mm-hmm.
What happens with the rest of the population is a bit, you cannot go from one to the other straight forward, but, it makes you wonder if.
It does. And I mean, I think that's kind of, why we've created this project, the Chess Equity Project, because we know there's this big gap in chess, not just in performance at the top end, but in participation. I think you're right. I think it's about 13%
Yes.
of tournament players are women, and that's something we're trying to fix. And so the more we know, the more changes we can make. So do you have any?
Yeah. No, what are you doing to try to fix it? Because in this panel, when I was invited to this panel, there was as well in Catalonia, there is quite a tradition on playing chess. And then as part of this panel, was a man that was the lead of one of the chess clubs, one of the quite important chess clubs in Catalonia. And there were two people from the club, and they were telling me that that things are changing quite a lot. Some years ago, I mean, that was their own experience. Some years ago, something as simple as the following: the bathrooms in the club, they were not separated for girls and boys. There was only a mixed gender, and that's because there were no girls. So nobody thought of having this. So even the space was not physically appealing to girls. I'm talking about children and adolescents. Okay. So now they have, I don't know at what point they realized that was an issue. And then they have separate bathrooms. So much better now. But they were talking about as well changing the narratives. And I found that super interesting. One of the directors of the club was saying that the narrative in chess is very much about war and attacking and dominating, and that this was not so appealing for girls, and that they were trying to change this narrative, not so much about war, but about life, and, changing a bit the narrative of the game so that they could attract more girls into the game. As well, they were mentioning, and this is as well because I have read several, when we were preparing and working on the project, I was reading several books on chess. And in one of them, they were saying that is teenagers. So basically, you have quite good, even proportions. So quite balanced, gender
As
balance when they are
children.
as children. But as soon the adolescents start, things start changing, you lose women. I don't know how reliable is that, if it's just anecdotal observation. I don't know the stats. I don't remember them.
No, it's well known. They call it the adolescent drop off, and yeah, it's well known. Yeah.
So I don't know. There are and then the stereotypes as well. Usually it's nerdy. You are, I don't know, maybe you are not the most popular. So it's a I think that the narrative of the game and the way adolescents, kids playing chess are perceived by others, maybe we could do something about that. It could be changed.
And I wonder if it's starting to, I mean, just, perception in the media. Well, there's several Netflix pieces, The Queen's Gambit and the new
Yeah,
Judith Polgar documentary. I think things might
exactly.
be going that way. I teach at a school, K through 8 chess club, after school programs. And I know what you're saying because when I was young, chess was not cool. And it was dorky kids, unpopular
Exactly.
kids who would play, and now it doesn't seem like that. It seems like everyone, there's lots of different kids that go, and everyone has their different interests. And I've got a kid who plays football who comes to chess club, and
Exactly.
it's, yeah. So I don't think it quite has that anyway. I think it's viewed a little bit differently, but I don't know.
I think that there is an interesting angle there because I know that it's used for education purposes. In Catalonia as well, there are many schools now using chess as part of the curricula or extracurricula, but that it's not like, oh, you are the nerd of the group, but it's quite accepted or less popular, let's put it that way. But it's very interesting, the use of chess as an educational tool, because it's very much correlated with, or I think, is very much related to strategic sophistication. Because in chess, you need to advance, no? What the other is doing. And, this read of the depth, this is what makes you good. Strategic sophistication is interesting and is very useful in life. So if we could sell chess as a way of making you better equipped for becoming a citizen to make better decisions in life, um, I think that would be very interesting.
No, I agree, and I think, and I don't know if I'm doing it right, but what I tell parents is, it's a lot like athletics. Children who participate in athletics, almost none of them become professional athletes, but a lot of them learn leadership and teamwork. And in
And
chess
resilience.
and resilience, and chess similar, almost none of them will be professional chess players, but they will learn absolutely resilience because you lose about half your games.
Exactly. And how to how do you say that? To cope with frustration,
So there's a lot of, exactly, a lot of life skills, and
non-soft
they apply
skills.
just to not just to boys, to girls as well. So let me ask you this: um, the studies, you studied mixed gender games, but do you feel like there's any value in women only events in chess? Do you think that hurts the development of the women's game or helps it?
Yeah, that's quite interesting because at the beginning of our talk, I was thanking you for giving publicity on this workshop that was only for women.
It's a similar debate in chess, right? Like, is it a good thing or is it not a good thing?
Okay, my understanding, and I'm from an outside point of view, so I'm not a player. I'm a bit of, let's put it myself as outsider, a bit of an ignorant here. What I understood as well in the panel when I was talking to, professional chess players, and as well, reading the book I read was Judith Polgar's book, one of them, and
Hmm.
several things that I came across. What I understand is that women only competitions are less prestigious and they are looked at like, if you are not good enough, you go for that competition.
Second
If you,
class.
yeah, if you are good enough, then you go to the mixed gender. And I think that this division is I don't think it's very constructive. But again, I'm not a chess player, so I don't know how
Mm.
real is this distinction, like between first class, second class, let's say.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that I would use these single gender competitions or women only competitions as a way of changing stereotypes. If it's not useful to change stereotypes, then why? I'm not sure, because the point of having these workshops, let's say, where we are only women, is to have an atmosphere that is friendly, that is not aggressive. Because at least in economics, in many, it's changing for good. I mean, for
Thankfully.
better. But, I've been still there are situations, meaning workshops, conference, seminars, where there's a bit of aggressivity in the questions. Sometimes women have to make or they perceive it like that. Okay. If you want to put it in a more subjective way, where women perceive that, they don't convince, or they are questioned more, they are interrupted more. Actually, there is a paper about that in seminars. So the point of having this workshop for women only, I feel it very strongly. I know that is not very popular, but the point is to offer a space where aggressivity is out of the room or minimized. And then it's amazing because, at least in my experience, it appears like a very friendly, everybody treats each other very nicely, a bit, sometimes even too much polite, no? Because, if I may ask, it's a completely different, suddenly, it's organic. It changes the dynamic of the interactions change a lot. And then people start talking about their own experiences. Not only we talk about research a lot, but as well about the problems we encounter. This type of, they organize it for experimental economics only once, but they have participated. There is a network for political economy women, and we have organized several of these workshops. So, this year is going to be in Vienna. So there is, it's from there that I got the inspiration. So I have always seen the same result. You go there, everybody's super friendly, and then the dynamics change. And from there, there are potential collaborations for grants, for papers, for, people are very relaxed. And usually everybody is, is happy with the experience. But the idea is to have, less aggressivity in the questions, less interruptions, a more friendly atmosphere. That's the point. So the objective is clear. But I don't know if having women-only competitions, what do we achieve? I mean, if we don't change the stereotypes, then it seems to me that it's not, I think that what is perversive is the stereotype, and that we lose women, as they get older. This adolescence, leaky,
Yeah, okay. No, it's
leaky.
the pipeline.
Exactly. Yes. So, I don't know. I think that there is something more profound that is not only about having women only competitions. I think there is something,
No, changing the narrative is
exactly.
kind of
So,
the point. Yeah. No, I think it's a very interesting point. And I mean, I think, in the chess world, we know that Judith has been very outspoken against women's only events and women's only titles. So that's no surprise to me. But I think your point about having the events not just for a venue for women to compete without men, where the vibe might be different, where they're not maybe worried about harassment or having that extra burden of representing women because everyone is a woman. But having them as a way of changing the stereotype of saying, hey, we are all here together and we are all doing it, and saying, this
no,
is a
but
women's sport.
I don't think we can change the stereotype without the help of men. I mean, it's like, it's like, all these interventions that are focused on women. Women have to become more assertive. We have to become more competitive. We have to become more like men. And I'm a bit tired, to be honest, of that, because, how about the rest, no? And I think that now I don't know if we are ready or not, because gender is not popular at the moment, especially in some countries. So I don't know if it's the right moment, but I think that we have to think more of institutions, the institutional design. Can we make the institutional or the institutions more friendly for these gender interactions? it's not only about changing women, it's making them more assertive, more competitive, more self-confident, more maybe we have to think of something else, no? That's good, but maybe something else that is not only asking women to change something.
I agree. I agree 100%.
But they don't know what, I mean, when I was in this panel, just to provoke them, I said, okay, so because, there is this very famous paper on the orchestra paper that they had this.
Orchestra, like violins, like music?
Yeah, where these
I don't know it.
auditions were gender blind. So basically, they had this super cool paper. So basically, when auditions were gender blind, basically that you couldn't see the gender of the performer, the number of women higher increased by substantially. So this is a
Wow.
super famous paper. And then the problem of that is that then there was like, okay, let's do everything blind. But sometimes it's possible and sometimes it's not. So I was just to provoke them. I said, okay, how about if we have blinded chess competitions? That you don't know whether you are playing. And then I remember that they were saying, no, but then, that wouldn't be fun because it's super. And that was a woman telling me that there
Mm.
is some kind of that you get like a punch by competing in front of someone. That is the whole ritual. That is super, there is a ritual and the ritual means something. And then if it's blind, you lose completely this adrenaline of having someone because it's a battle, no, somehow. So I'm using the narrative of battles that, so, and that was, I was just having a bit of fun there. So I don't know what the solution is to change stereotypes, but changing the narrative of the game, I think it would be a good starting point.
Okay. No, that's a great suggestion. And I do want to circle back because I agree 100% that this isn't a woman's problem. This is a everybody problem, and especially in chess and other areas where it's male dominated. Most tournament chess players currently are men. So I think it's at least as much of a man's problem because I don't think men want to compete just with other men. We want to grow the game. We want to grow the game for everybody, and so we want women to participate. We want them. I mean, and personally, I to think that if I'm playing a woman, and statistically, she might do a little bit worse against me because I'm a man, and to think if even just a little bit of the reason for that is that she's afraid of me or thinks that I'm going to harass her or something, that makes me feel terrible. And I'm sure a lot of men feel that way, and we don't want that. So yeah, changing the narrative and making this more of a welcoming space for everybody is absolutely an everybody problem, not just a woman's problem. So I agree with you there.
Let me share with you as well something that we find in the paper that I forgot to mention. We find as well because the other mechanism that we explore is whether we were thinking, okay, we observe that women perform worse against men. They commit more mistakes, no, more errors.
Right? Mm-hmm.
And then we were thinking, oh, is that because maybe they compete less. They make a lower effort when they are competing against a man. So, they stay for competition, especially when they are competing against men, because
Mm.
the fact that the performance of women goes down when they compete in mixed gender settings is not new. There is a very old paper by Nisi et al. Showing this result, that women compete equally well in single gender, but they reduce their performance when they compete against a man. And then there is all the theory of the state for competition and the state for competition, especially when the opponent is a man. So we
Mm-hmm.
wanted to analyze this channel. And then what we did was to analyze, because we didn't have data on the clock, we analyzed the number of movements before resignation. So we got all the games in our sample that end up with a resignation.
Right.
And
Yes.
then we analyze the number of games before resigning. And then we interact that with the gender of the opponent. And what we found is that women were not changing behavior when the opponent was a man with respect to a woman. They were behaving the same. So basically, the average number of movements before resignation was the same. But men were changing behavior. And what we found in the data is that men were taking longer to resign against a woman. They were losing. They had to go, to stop. But they were holding there, not willing to accept
the lost position.
Exactly. Actually, I think they were playing 8% longer against a woman than against another man. So they were playing for longer. And then we were talking informally with some chess players, and they said that yes, I mean, there is a bit here, that playing against a woman is not good. Like the cognitive, the psychological cost, this is what we argue in the paper, no? That it could be that the psychological cost of losing, against a woman, being a man, the psychological cost of losing against a woman was larger for men in comparison with losing against another man. So do you think this is plausible? Because you are a chess player.
I absolutely think it's possible. And I'm trying to remember a story because was it Vera Menchik? I'm going to say it's Vera Menchik, and if I'm wrong, I'll have to correct myself in the notes. But so Vera Menchik was a Russian-born player. She was one of the early pioneers of women's chess. She was the world chess champion in the 30s, I think, between world wars. Anyway, she was very strong, and she played a lot of women's events, but she played a lot of open events, and she'd play men. And then one man, and I don't remember his name, started making fun of her and said, if anybody who loses to her will join the Vera Menchik Club or something like that. And it was not a nice thing to be in, the Vera Menchik Club. That means you had lost to a woman.
Exactly.
And like you were actually called out for it. And these are the best players in the world. So from the beginning of women being strong in chess, and I mean, we all know the Bobby Fischer quote, and we all know the Kasparov quote. From the beginning of women being strong in chess, men have said it is shameful to lose to a woman just because she's a woman, not because she's bad. It's not like you lost to a bad player. It's like you lost to a strong player who is a woman. And so absolutely that has been in the air of chess from the beginning.
So this, we find it we observe that in the data, or what we observe is coherent with that. So, but this, for instance, is something that should be changed if we want more women, no? Playing chess. I mean, this.
Right. Well, and this is the men's part, right? Yeah. So this is very interesting. I mean, men in lost positions are holding on longer against a woman, even though they're lost.
The rationale is that if women make more errors against men, if you keep playing for longer, I mean, it's not the probability that the woman makes a mistake is not zero, no? I mean, the longer you keep, you linger, it could be that, she makes a terrible mistake or whatever, and then you end up in a much better position or even winning, or, so rationally it's not irrational, but I think that the point is this differential treatment, that you don't do this with men. This would be not irrational if you know that women make more mistakes against men. Then you will say, okay, I hold here because maybe she gets nervous or whatever. And then, but anyway, this is what we see. I mean, conjectures apart, that I don't know exactly what is in the head of players.
Sure.
What we observe, the data, is that they stay longer It's
Okay.
quite funny.
Well, yeah, that's very interesting, and I don't know what our takeaway from that is because I mean, on one hand, if you say to a man, well, you know, ideally we would want to treat everybody the same. And so shouldn't you resign in the same position against a woman as a man? Well, I mean, on one hand, you'd say, yeah, I mean, we treat everybody the same, and why would I treat a woman different? Well, except that there is this other part that maybe there's an error coming, but maybe the error is only coming because I'm behaving differently myself.
Oh,
And it's
that's
kind of a weird chicken or the egg situation.
yeah. I don't know. Yeah, we will need more data to analyze all that. But yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, Maria, thank you so much for taking the time. This is very interesting. I'm sure people will be really interested to hear what you have to say. Um, yeah. Thanks so much. And yeah. And I hope we have this opportunity again sometime.
Oh yes, because I'm very much interested to learn about this work you are doing with the schools. I think if we want to change something or try to change something, it should be through the little ones.